A black man suddenly walked into a large bank and claimed he was the owner. Everyone looked at him with contempt and laughed, until he pulled out a piece of paper. At that moment, the entire room gasped in shock. "This bank is mine." The words weren't shouted. They weren't spit out with anger or dramatics. They just slipped out, slow and calm, like someone who'd said them 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. At first, nobody reacted. Then Martin, the young teller with the slicked-back hair and that smug smirk he always wore when old folks came in needing help with their checks, let out a laugh. "Ain't that something?" he mumbled under his breath to the girl beside him. "Guess we letting the crazy ones walk in off the street now." A few more laughs followed, light at first, but spreading like wildfire across the bank lobby. Folks looked up from their phones, their banking slips, their quiet little lives, just to stare at the man. He wasn't hard to spot. Carson Rivera stood still near the center of the lobby, like a statue someone forgot to polish. His coat was dark brown, threadbare, and spotted with old stains, sleeves frayed like dry bark. His shoes looked soft from wear, soles nearly detached. On his back hung an old canvas bag, one strap ready to give out, but somehow holding strong. The laughter didn't touch him. Carson's skin was the color of old mahogany, worn by time and sun and memory. His face was folded in places, but there was nothing broken about it. He stood tall, no hunch, no tremble. His eyes scanned the room like he'd been here before, like he'd built it from the ground up and had come back to find strangers sitting in his living room. Stephen Miller stepped forward. He always did. Stephen had that kind of walk that dared people to test him, his shoulders squared like he was still in the Corps, even though the closest thing to combat he'd seen in the last 10 years was escorting teenagers out for using fake IDs. His hand brushed against the side of his belt, not quite on the gun, but close enough. "Sir," Stephen said, voice steady but sharp, "this here's a private business. You can't just walk in claiming you own the place." Carson turned to him. No rush, just turned, slow and full. The old man looked him right in the eyes and said, "I ain't claiming nothing. I'm telling you, this bank belongs to me." Someone near the deposit slips scoffed. A woman in pearls clutched her purse just a little tighter, slid a step toward the exit. An older man in a suit muttered, "Must be one of them street folk." Lincoln Temp, the branch manager, poked his head out from behind the glass-walled office. His jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. Lincoln wasn't one for drama. He liked things orderly, smooth, clean ties and clean numbers, but he could feel the air shift, like something had just walked in that didn't belong to Rockview. Still, it was his job to maintain peace, order. He stepped forward slowly, brushing past Stephen, who didn't move. "Sir," Lincoln said, his voice all professional calm, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Carson didn't move. "Ain't no misunderstanding. Y'all took something that was mine. Now I'm here to take it back." Lincoln forced a smile. "Mr. Rivera," the old man said. "Carson Rivera." Lincoln blinked. That name, it tickled something. A memo? A file? A half-forgotten story his daddy told over bourbon once? He pushed the thought aside. "Mr. Rivera," he said, gentler now. "This building has been here under the Matthews family name for over 60 years. Maybe you're confusing us with—" "I ain't confused," Carson said, steady. "I helped pour the foundation for this place back when your folks didn't think a man like me could do much more than mop floors. I bled for this bank. I watched them carve me out of the story like I never existed." Stephen shifted beside Lincoln. "You need to leave, now, before we call someone who'll make you—" Carson finally moved. He reached up, took the strap of that heavy canvas bag, and slowly lowered it to the floor. It hit with a weight far louder than its size. Every head turned. "I ain't here to beg. I'm here to show you all the truth," Carson said. He bent down, his hands old but firm, his breath even, and began to untie the strap. The knot was stubborn. Carson worked it slowly, careful with every tug. His fingers weren't what they used to be, swollen at the knuckles, darkened with age, but there was still steadiness in his movements, like a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. The room had gone damn near silent. Only thing louder than the air was the hush that came with it. People leaned in, not too close, just enough to see, to be the first to whisper about it later. The woman in pearls had stopped clutching her purse. The man with the Bluetooth in his ear had paused mid-call. Even Martin, who'd been snickering minutes before, was quiet now, standing stiff behind the teller window. Carson peeled the flap back, and there it was, old bills, yellowed by time, bundled together with brittle red twine. One by one, he lifted them out. Each one bore a faded Chase Bank logo that hadn't been used since most of the folks in that lobby were in diapers, or not even born yet. Some bundles were wrapped in wax paper, still dusty, like they'd come out of some vault buried in the ground. Carson laid them gently on the tile floor like he was handling history, because he was. Stephen let out a sharp breath through his nose. "Old money don't prove nothing. Could have come from anywhere." But his voice lacked bite now, less threat, more habit. Lincoln didn't speak at all. He took a step forward, squatting down near the bundles, not touching them, just looking. Close. Like something about them was whispering in a voice he wasn't ready to hear. His jaw was locked, but the color had drained from his face, and his eyes kept flicking to the faint, faded emblem printed in the corner of every bill. Carson wasn't finished. He reached into the bag again, slow and sure, and this time pulled out something heavier, a thick, worn-out leather ledger, brown as dried tobacco, corners chewed up by time. The moment he placed it on the marble floor, you could almost feel the weight of it settle across the room, not just in pounds, but in years. He opened it. The pages inside were yellowed, edges curled, ink faded but still legible. And there, scribbled across the top in bold cursive, Chase Bank, Founding Ledger, 1948. "I kept it," Carson said, "when I still thought I had a say in what I helped build." Lincoln stood slowly. His voice came out low. "What is this?" Carson didn't look up. "That there's the truth you folks been pretending never happened." His finger moved down the page, stopping at a pair of signatures written side by side in black ink, one shakier than the other, but both still standing. "Carson Rivera," he read, "and John Chavez." Lincoln blinked. John Chavez, my father used to talk about that name, said he was one of the early builders of this branch, partnered with the Matthews. Carson's eyes lifted, sharp and clear. "He partnered with me first." The room held still. "I was there when the doors opened," Carson continued, voice even but weighted. "I helped raise the damn frame, watched every brick laid down with my own eyes. Back then, they needed me. Needed someone who knew the neighborhood, who could connect with the working folks who didn't trust no white man with their money." He turned a page, ran his fingers down more numbers, more names. "Soon as the ink dried, soon as the money started rolling in, they decided I was too dark to be in the picture. Too much pride, too much voice. They rewrote the story, scrubbed my name out of every document they could. And when I fought back, when I brought this very ledger to court, I got laughed out the room, told I must have forged it." He looked up again, eyes landing on Stephen. I ain't here to stir trouble. I done had my fill of that. But I ain't dying with their lie living over me, neither. Stephen stepped forward, chin raised. You saying you co-founded this bank? I ain't saying it, Carson replied. I'm showing it. Stephen shook his head, though it lacked conviction now. How come no one's ever heard of you? There's no record? No history books? That's the point, Carson said, voice rising just enough. You think folks like me got statues? You think truth stays up in bright lights when it don't fit the picture? Carson's voice settled into the quiet like dust after a storm. He reached down, his movements slow and steady, like he wasn't in a rush to prove a thing, because he didn't need to. From the bottom of his bag, he pulled out one more ledger. This one was older than the first, its leather cracked and soft, like worn-out skin, corners curled, the spine nearly coming apart. He cradled it like something sacred. The air inside Chase Bank had changed, the kind of change you could feel in your bones. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody looked amused. Even the quiet murmurs had died down, replaced by something else, something uneasy. Carson looked directly at Lincoln Temp, whose eyes were still on the first ledger, fingers clenched at his sides. He hadn't moved much, but his silence was loud. Loud enough that even the young folks behind the counter had started glancing toward him, waiting to see what their manager would say, if anything. Carson opened the second ledger, pages creaking like old floorboards. His fingers flipped through until he found it, the page with his name again. But this time there was more. Below his signature and John Chavez's, there was a line left blank. I brought this one to court, too, Carson said, voice like gravel rubbed through cloth. They told me it wasn't enough, said if I didn't have legal proof that I still owned the shares, I had no right. He lifted his gaze. But I never signed nothing. I never sold nothing. I was removed. He pulled out a stack of yellowed legal papers, certified, stamped, but never honored. He held them out. His hand didn't shake. Lincoln stepped forward like a man sleepwalking, unsure if he should be afraid of what he'd find. He took the documents without a word. His eyes scanned the pages, flipping back and forth as if searching for a hole in the truth. But there wasn't one. The silence grew heavier. Stephen shifted beside them, arms crossed over his chest. But he didn't interrupt. Not this time. Carson took a breath, not a tired one, but deep and rooted. John Chavez and I, we started this thing shoulder to shoulder. He was my best friend back then. We worked day and night, had dreams bigger than our own names. We wanted to build a place for working folks. Black, white, didn't matter. Just good people, good money, good trust. He paused, his eyes clouded for a moment. But when the Maddox family came calling, white men in fancy suits talking about expansion and legacy, John changed, said they could take us nationwide, said they'd polish the brand. What he really meant was get me out the picture, quietly. Lincoln swallowed hard. His voice was faint. You never signed anything? Carson's answer was immediate. Never. I refused. Told them if they wanted me gone, they'd have to drag me out. He tapped the papers in Lincoln's hands. So they did. With lawyers, with pressure, with stories. Told the newspapers I'd mismanaged the books. Said I was sick. Said I'd stepped down. Every record after that, my name's gone, erased, like I never was. Lincoln's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked down at the documents again, and his hands, those perfectly manicured manager hands, began to tremble just a little. Stephen's eyes narrowed. So what's this supposed to mean now? You coming back to take the place over? Carson didn't answer right away. His gaze swept the room, stopping on faces one by one. Some were looking at him different now, less like he was a crazy old man, more like a man who might just be telling the truth. A few shifted awkwardly. Some looked ashamed. "I'm not here to burn the place down," he said finally. "But I ain't dying with this lie hanging over my head neither. I want it on the record. I want it known. What y'all built, you built it off my back. My name ought to be in the books. My story ought to be in the light." He paused, then added, voice quieter, but heavier than anything he'd said so far. "And I want someone to look me in the eye and say they know it now." Lincoln was still holding the papers, still reading, though he wasn't really reading anymore. His face had gone pale, jaw tight, brows furrowed in a way that said the truth had settled in and didn't plan on leaving. One of the younger tellers, a girl named Emily, stood frozen behind the counter. She was the first to look away from her screen and toward Carson with something different in her eyes. Not pity, not fear, but clarity, like something inside her had shifted. Lincoln finally lifted his head. These signatures, these seals," his voice was strained. "They're all dated, stamped. These are real." Carson didn't move. "I've kept them for 50 years, he said. "Carried them farther than any bank vault would, through courtrooms, through church basements, through living rooms where nobody listened. Today, I brought them here, where they belong." A thick quiet filled the room again. The silence held for a long, heavy beat, like the air itself was weighing down on every chest in that lobby. Then Stephen Miller's voice cut through it like broken glass. "This is a damn performance," he barked, stepping forward, the heel of his boot echoing sharp on the marble. "A staged act. That bag, them papers, could have come from a flea market for all we know." His face had gone red, blotchy from the neck up, the kind of red that came from more than just anger. It was fear, too, of losing something he couldn't quite name, but felt in his bones. His hand drifted to the holster at his waist, thumb resting heavy on the snap. People noticed. Some gasped. Others shuffled backwards, clutching their purses, their coats, their kids. The mood of the room had shifted again. What had been curiosity was now tension. Thick electric tension, the kind that made the back of your neck itch. "Call the police!" Stephen barked. "Now! This old man's trespassing, stirring up chaos, threatening the peace." A beat of chaos followed. Papers rustled, shoes scraped, someone dropped their phone. But Carson stood still. Same as he had from the beginning. His coat hung loose, his bag open beside his feet, the ledgers laid bare for anyone to see. There was no sudden movement, no raised voice, just presence. A kind of stillness that only comes from a man who's lived through more storms than he can count. "I ain't broken no law," Carson said, calm but sharp. "Not a one. I walked in through that door like any man got business to settle. And I brought proof. You don't like what it says, that ain't the same as me causing trouble." Lincoln stepped forward before Stephen could shout again. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "That's enough, Stephen." Stephen turned, disbelief in his face. "You kidding me? You see what he's doing?" "I see exactly what he's doing," Lincoln said, his jaw set. "And I see what you're doing, too." There was a pause, and for the first time, Stephen didn't know what to say. "I need time to review these documents properly," Lincoln continued. "I can't just dismiss them." Stephen stared, stunned. "You're taking his side?" "I'm saying truth don't disappear just because it's inconvenient." Lincoln's voice was shaking just a little, but it didn't waver. It was the voice of a man waking up after a long sleep, and behind the fear in his eyes was something steadier than before. Not confidence exactly, something deeper, conviction. Stephen's eyes darted from Lincoln to Carson, then to the staff and customers now watching closely. His lips curled in frustration, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Carson took a small step forward. His voice was low, and the room went still again to catch every word. "I didn't come for revenge," he said. "I came so you'd look this in the eye. You want to call the law on me? Go ahead. But just know this. Every time someone tried to shut me down before, it was to protect a lie dressed up nice in paperwork and privilege." His gaze met Stephen's, steady and unwavering. "You draw that gun, you don't shoot me. You shoot what's left of truth in this place." Stephen flinched, not visibly, but enough that anyone watching closely could see the shift in his stance. His hand slipped off the holster. Across the lobby, the atmosphere changed again. Emily Carter, youngest on the staff, quiet girl with nervous eyes, stepped back from her desk. Her hands were clasped, knuckles white, but her eyes were fixed on Carson like she was seeing him for the first time. Josh, the teller who'd snickered with Martin earlier, looked down at the marble beneath his shoes. He swallowed hard. He didn't speak, but his body had gone still in that guilty kind of way. Lincoln turned slightly, his eyes sweeping across his staff. "You all hear him," he said. "You saw what he brought." He gestured at the open ledgers, the stamped documents, the weight of time laid out on the floor like evidence at a trial no one wanted but couldn't avoid. "Does this look like a man making up stories?" No one answered, not out loud. But something had cracked. Not broken, not yet, but cracked. A shift, a tension you couldn't unfeel. Stephen finally dropped his arms to his sides. His eyes, once hot with anger, now darted, unsure, looking for someone to back him. But no one moved. Even Martin had gone pale. And in the stillness, Carson knelt down and slowly closed the old ledger. His fingers lingered on the leather cover for a moment, gentle, almost like he was saying goodbye to a part of his own life. He looked up at Lincoln. "I waited 50 years for someone to listen. If it takes 50 more, I'll still be right here." Lincoln nodded, just once. Lincoln didn't say anything for a while. He stood there, ledger still open in his hands, the yellowed documents spread across the cold tile like ghosts laid bare under fluorescent light. Around him, the lobby had gone near still, just the soft hum of the ceiling vents and the low creak of someone shifting their weight near the entrance. But inside Lincoln's chest, it was loud, loud with fear, loud with years of silence he'd inherited without question. He looked down at the signatures again, Carson Rivera and John Chavez, side by side, written in ink that had outlived half the people who once swore by it. Carson's name hadn't been on any plaque, any file, any damn thing Lincoln had ever seen in his time as branch manager. And that was the point. His mind raced. He saw Maddox faces, the ones who sat on Chase's board, the ones who hosted galas and fundraisers, the ones who shook his hand and called him one of the smart ones. He saw what they would do to him if he backed this man. Not just fire him, bury him, quietly. But then his eyes found Carson's again. There was no desperation in them, no begging, just a quiet knowing. The kind of look that said, "I've seen too much to be surprised, and I've lost too much to be afraid." Lincoln let out a slow breath and took a step forward, away from the corporate playbook and toward something older, something real. Behind him, Stephen Miller still stood stiff, hand near the holster like it had frozen there. His face looked carved out of tension and disbelief. Lincoln turned to him. "We're not doing this with guns," he said. His voice was soft but final. This ain't that kind of fight. Stephen's brow furrowed. He didn't move, but his grip loosened. Just a little. Lincoln kept going. You don't get to point a weapon at truth just 'cause it makes you uncomfortable. This ain't about law and order, Steve. This is about justice. There's a difference. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unblinking. Stephen didn't respond. His eyes darted. Carson, Lincoln, the others in the lobby now watching everything unfold. For a second, he looked like he wanted to argue, to shout. But what came out wasn't anger. It was confusion, and maybe fear. Then Carson reached once more into his bag, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. He pulled out a folder wrapped in cracked brown paper, held together by a thin piece of string. He laid it on the table beside the ledger, untied the knot, and unfolded the contents. These here, Carson said, voice low, are court records, letters from lawyers, judges, all the times I tried to get someone, anyone, to hear me out. He slid a paper forward with one slow hand. This one's from 1974. I brought them all this same ledger. You know what the judge said? He cleared his throat and read aloud, the words quiet but sharp as a blade. A colored man has no legal claim to an institution of this size and no business believing he should. This court sees no value in pursuing fantasy. The lobby froze. The words sat there like broken glass underfoot. Carson looked around the room, voice now raw. I ain't asking for sympathy. I done lived through worse. But I am asking folks to stop pretending this didn't happen. Nobody spoke. Then something small broke the stillness. A pair of heels clicked softly against tile. Emily Carter, young, barely out of college, always quiet, always scribbling notes, stepped out from behind her counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked, but her steps never faltered. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked on Carson. She knelt down, picked up one of the old banknotes that had fallen near the edge of the ledger. Her fingers brushed the faded logo, traced the paper's edges like it might fall apart in her hand. Then she turned and walked slowly to the table. She placed the note in front of Carson. I believe you, she said, barely above a whisper. I think it's time we face the truth. Her voice wasn't loud, but in that silence it landed like thunder. Josh didn't move at first. He just stood there behind the teller window, arms stiff at his sides, lips pressed so tight they'd gone pale. He'd watched the whole thing unfold, the ledgers, the courtroom letters, the ledger Carson placed like a casket of forgotten truth. But it was Emily's voice, soft and steady, that cracked something inside him wide open. Without a word, he stepped out from behind the counter. His sneakers squeaked on the floor, just a small sound, but it turned a few heads. He moved slow, almost like he wasn't sure what his legs were doing, or if he was allowed to do what his heart told him to. He walked over to the edge of the circle, bent down, and picked up another faded banknote. One of the old ones with the ink half gone and the logo worn thin from time. He looked at it for a second. Then he walked up beside Emily and placed it down beside hers. His voice cracked when he spoke. I'm sorry, Mr. Rivera. I didn't know. I never even thought to ask. Carson didn't say anything, just gave a slow nod. It was enough. The room held still. Then another movement came. A woman from the back office, her name was Cheryl, older than the rest, always wore a brooch on her blouse and didn't say much, walked out holding a small envelope. She opened it, took out a crumpled note she'd been saving for years as a keepsake from when she started here, and added it to the growing pile. Then Martin, the same Martin who'd laughed loudest when Carson first walked in, walked out with a face red as fire. He didn't say a word, just bent down, picked up the last note near the base of the counter, and carried it with both hands like it weighed 100 pounds. He placed it on the table, eyes never meeting Carson's. One by one, they came. The folks who had snickered, the ones who stayed quiet, the ones who'd looked away. They came and laid those old bills down like confessions, like offerings, like maybe the only thing left to do now was to stop pretending. Carson didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood in the center of that circle, surrounded by history that had once been denied, but now stood tall, note by note, face by face. His hands were still, his shoulders upright, but his eyes were full. He didn't cry. But Lord, he could have. Stephen hadn't moved. He stood stiff, hand still near the gun at his side, fingers twitching now and then like muscle memory couldn't quite let go of what it used to trust. His face had gone from red to something else, ashen, pale, like the blood had drained straight from his jawline. This wasn't the fight he'd prepared for. No shouting, no violence, no threat he could tackle to the ground. Just paper, names, silence, eyes that looked at him like he was the stranger now. He didn't understand this kind of rebellion. It was too quiet, too decent, and that's what made it terrifying. He shifted his weight, looked at Lincoln like maybe he could find backup there, but Lincoln wasn't looking at him anymore. Lincoln Temp stood near the ledgers, gripping the documents tighter than before. His tie had loosened a bit, his forehead glistened, but there was something new in his stance, like a man who'd finally realized the ground under him had always been shaky, only now he was choosing where to plant his feet for real. He turned to Carson. "Mr. Rivera," he said, low and steady, "I need to take these documents upstairs. There's a protocol I have to follow, but before I do, I want you to know I hear you, and I won't be the one to bury this again." Carson gave him a long, heavy look. It wasn't judgment, it wasn't relief. It was something older, something like, finally. Lincoln turned toward the back of the building, toward the offices where the Maddox name still hung in gilded frames. He paused at the edge of the lobby, the weight of everything pressing on him like a wave. In his chest, a question rose, not from doubt, but from that quiet place inside every decent man that still fears what doing the right thing might cost. If I don't stand with truth now, he thought, what kind of man am I later? He swallowed that question and walked away, toward a desk, a phone line, a future he hadn't expected to face. Back in the lobby, no one moved. The table now held a pile of history, laid out in silence by people who, just moments ago, might have called that history a lie. Emily stepped back to her counter, but she didn't sit. Josh stood with his arms crossed now, but it wasn't defensiveness anymore. It was something like guarding, like maybe he finally knew what side he stood on. The next morning, the sun rose slow over the city, but inside Chase Bank's corporate tower, the day had already turned cold. Lincoln Temp walked through the glass doors of the executive wing with a worn leather case in his left hand and a weight on his chest that no briefcase could hold. The case was old, nearly as old as the documents inside. Carson's ledgers, stamped court records, brittle letters from long-dead lawyers, and folded bills with ink so faded it felt like you were touching memory itself. He walked down the carpeted hall, shoes quiet against the floor, but his heart heavy as boots on gravel. This part of the building didn't feel like the rest of Chase. It didn't hum with activity or echo with phones and feet. It was still, controlled, clean, and cold. At the end of the hall, double oak doors opened to the boardroom. The men inside were already seated, mahogany table, leather chairs, water poured into crystal glasses that barely got touched. The kind of place where decisions weren't discussed, they were finalized. Lincoln had sat in this room plenty of times before, listening, nodding, taking orders, but today he wasn't here to nod. He took the last open seat. Across from him sat Wallace Maddox, gray hair slicked back, hands folded on the table like he was holding a prayer hostage. Wallace wasn't just board chairman, he was legacy, old money, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice to keep the room in check. Lincoln placed the case on the table, slow and deliberate. "I brought something you need to see," he said. No one moved. So he opened the case and began to lay out the pieces. First, the ledger, then the letters, then the money. Finally, the court rulings, one after another, like tombstones pulled from the dirt. "This," he said, "is the truth about the founding of this bank." Wallace's eyes narrowed. "We've reviewed our records. There's no evidence of a co-founder named Carson Rivera." Lincoln didn't flinch. He flipped the ledger open to the signatures, Carson and John Chavez, side by side. "This ledger predates any document Chase has on file, and the ink's been verified. These court letters, they prove Rivera tried, multiple times, to assert his legal rights. He was shut out." An older board member, Judge Holcomb, shifted in his chair. "Do you even understand what you're suggesting, Mr. Temp? You're saying everything we've stood on for 75 years is a lie?" Lincoln looked him dead in the eye. "I'm saying the truth was buried, and I'm not letting it stay buried." Wallace leaned forward, voice cool but sharp. "You're walking into dangerous territory, son. You think this is about one man and some old paper? You're talking about dragging the name of this institution through the mud. You're talking about headlines, lawsuits, shareholder panic. And for what?" Lincoln tapped the ledger gently. "For what's right." A quiet spread across the table. Then Wallace leaned back, lips tight, and said, "You realize this ends your career?" "I realize it might," Lincoln said. "But I'd rather lose a job than spend one more day building something on somebody else's stolen foundation." Someone else at the table cleared their throat. Margaret Blanchard, head of compliance. She glanced down at the documents and then at Wallace. "These documents should be tested independently," she said. "If they're authentic, we're liable, not just ethically, but legally." Wallace turned to her, tone clipped. "That's not your call." "No," she said, steady, "but it's my responsibility." Lincoln nodded. "That's all I'm asking. Let a third party verify it. Put it on the record. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away. But if I'm right, Carson Rivera deserves to have his name restored." There was no yelling, no dramatic walkouts, just stillness, cold and sharp. Then Wallace gave a smile, tight, small, the kind that didn't touch his eyes. "You really want to go to war over this, Lincoln? You want to risk your pension, your future, your name, over a man who doesn't even show up in the archives?" "I'm not at war," Lincoln said. "I'm just done pretending silence is peace." Wallace stared at him for a long moment. Then he leaned in, voice low enough only Lincoln could hear. "You don't know what we're capable of." Lincoln didn't blink. "You've spent 75 years showing the world exactly what you're capable of. That's the problem." There was no shouting after that, no gavel slamming, just a kind of quiet that felt like thunder held in a jar. The meeting adjourned without resolution, but the documents stayed behind. So did whispers. So did doubt. Outside the boardroom, Lincoln stood in the hallway alone. He knew the calls would start soon, legal, financial, reputational threats, but he didn't feel afraid, not the way he expected. Just clear. It started with a leak. One memo, a scanned ledger page, a handful of emails from a Chase Bank inbox that ended up in the wrong hands, or maybe the right ones. By the time the morning sun broke over the skyline, the story was already out. Forgotten Founder, The Hidden Legacy of Carson Rivera. That was the headline. By lunchtime, the video clips had gone viral. News vans sat parked outside the Rockview branch like vultures, cameras aimed at the building where it all began. Anchors on national television read from scanned court records, zoomed in on old signatures. The photo of Carson, taken from someone's shaky cell phone as he stood in the lobby, hands resting on his canvas bag, was on every major outlet. And Carson? Well, he didn't want the spotlight. Never had. But it found him anyway. He stood in front of microphones he didn't ask for, under lights too bright for his old eyes. His voice was calm, weathered, the kind that made folks lean in, not because it was loud, but because it carried something rare. Weight. "I ain't here to shame nobody," he said, "but I won't let history keep telling lies either. I don't want money, I want the truth." Then he paused. "I didn't just lose a business. I lost my name, my place in the world. That kind of loss don't show up in a balance sheet, but it stays with you." Behind him stood Emily Carter, Josh, Lincoln Temp, and nearly a dozen other employees from Chase, young and old, who'd stepped forward to form what they called the Truth and Justice Committee. They wore plain pins on their lapels, shaped like a broken chain. Their message was simple. It's time the bank investigated itself. Wallace Maddox, predictably, fought back. His lawyers sent cease and desist letters to every major media outlet. His PR team released statements calling Carson's claims unsubstantiated and potentially fabricated. He hired historians to muddy the waters with long, jargon-heavy reports. But the truth doesn't stay buried once it's breathing. Investigative journalists followed the trail Maddox tried to erase. They uncovered silent buyouts, missing archives, buried memos. Whistleblowers came forward, former interns, legal aides, even a retired branch manager from Alabama who remembered Carson's name, whispered in back rooms before being erased from every file. The public turned fast. Former customers cut ties with the bank. Protests popped up outside big city branches. Hashtags trended. "Remember Carson" appeared in the windows of small businesses and across church bulletin boards in the South. The story had outgrown the lobby. It had become a movement. And through it all, Carson stayed grounded. He answered questions with the same voice he'd used that day in the bank. Slow, firm, patient. Not chasing sympathy, just offering truth, again and again. "I was never looking to be famous," he told one reporter. "Just looking to be seen." It took months. Lawsuits were filed, boards were reshuffled, investors got spooked. But eventually, the system cracked. The case was taken to court, public, on record, with journalists in every pew and cameras at every corner. And for once, it wasn't Carson being questioned. It was the bank. The documents stood up to every test. The signatures matched. The timelines aligned. And no matter how hard the Maddox family tried to spin it, the facts didn't care who had money or power. They just sat there, solid, undeniable. Then the ruling came. Chase Bank is hereby ordered to formally acknowledge Mr. Carson Rivera as co-founder. His name shall be included in all historical and institutional records, and he is to receive a full public apology in accordance with federal restoration protocols. The courtroom didn't cheer. Carson didn't pump a fist. That wasn't his way. He just nodded once, like a man who'd been carrying a storm on his back, and now, finally, felt the rain start to ease. The apology came 2 weeks later. A full hall packed with press, employees, and board members. Carson stood at the front in his one clean suit, canvas bag still slung over his shoulder. That bag, as worn as his hands, had become a symbol now, of memory, of truth. He looked out at the crowd, then down at the speech Emily had typed out for him. He folded it in half, set it on the podium, and chose to speak from the heart. "I ain't angry," he began, voice steady. "I've lived a long life, and I've carried this for most of it, but today I don't carry it no more." He looked at Lincoln, at Josh, at Emily, who stood with glassy eyes just a few rows back. This was never about revenge. It was about dignity, about setting the record straight, for me, and for all the others like me, whose names never made it into the history books. Stephen Miller was there, too. He sat near the back, out of uniform now, no badge clipped to his belt. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. When Carson passed by him on the way out, Stephen stood and bowed his head, not to be seen, just to show it mattered. Carson walked out of the building into the sunlight. The crowd made way, not because he was famous, but because he was free. No one laughed this time, no one doubted. They just watched and nodded. The old man with the canvas bag had told the truth, and the world had finally listened. The story of Carson Rivera is a powerful, emotionally grounded journey of truth, dignity, and quiet resistance. What makes his path so deeply moving is not just the injustice he endured, but the grace with which he carried it for over 50 years. Carson's silence wasn't weakness, it was endurance. He bore the weight of erasure, not for personal gain, but to one day see the truth set free. His canvas bag, old and worn, became a symbol not just of forgotten history, but of the soul of a man who refused to be erased. Carson didn't fight with anger or vengeance. He stood with dignity, asking only for recognition, not revenge. That kind of strength is rare. His quiet courage stirred a wave of awakening from Lincoln's moral reckoning to Emily and Josh's transformation, showing that it's never too late to choose conscience over comfort. The story teaches a profound lesson. Truth cannot stay buried forever, and justice, though delayed, is never truly lost. In a world full of noise, Carson's voice, steady and slow, reminds us that real change often begins with one person refusing to forget. It is a deeply human, deeply American reminder of why history must be told right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way. Stephen Miller was there too. He sat near the back, out of uniform now, no badge clipped to his belt. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. When Carson passed by him on the way out, Stephen stood and bowed his head, not to be seen, just to show it mattered. Carson walked out of the building into the sunlight. The crowd made way, not because he was famous, but because he was free. No one laughed this time. No one doubted. They just watched and nodded. The old man with the canvas bag had told the truth, and the world had finally listened. The story of Carson Rivera is a powerful, emotionally grounded journey of truth, dignity, and quiet resistance. What makes his path so deeply moving is not just the injustice he endured, but the grace with which he carried it for over 50 years. Carson's silence wasn't weakness, it was endurance. He bore the weight of erasure, not for personal gain, but to one day see the truth set free. His canvas bag, old and worn, became a symbol not just of forgotten history, but of the soul of a man who refused to be erased. Carson didn't fight with anger or vengeance. He stood with dignity, asking only for recognition, not revenge. That kind of strength is rare. His quiet courage stirred a wave of awakening from Lincoln's moral reckoning to Emily and Josh's transformation, showing that it's never too late to choose conscience over comfort. The story teaches a profound lesson. Truth cannot stay buried forever, and justice, though delayed, is never truly lost. In a world full of noise, Carson's voice, steady and slow, reminds us that real change often begins with one person refusing to forget. It is a deeply human, deeply American reminder of why history must be told right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel.